All right, picture this. It's the early 2000s, you're walking through a Volvo dealership with your parents. Everywhere you look, there are beige wagons, safe sedans, and ads promising that if you drive one of these things, you'll never, ever die in a crash. And then, sitting in the corner, is this unassuming four-door sedan that looks like it belongs to a dentist. But under the hood, tiding 300 horsepower, a 6-speed manual, Brembo brakes, and all-wheel drive. There it is, the Volvo S60R. That's right, Volvo, the brand everyone jokes about being the official car of college professors, quietly built a turbocharged rocket ship that no one talks about. This car is proof that the Swedes didn't just want you to survive accidents, they wanted you to go 150 miles per hour on the freeway. So what made the S60R one of the coolest and most overlooked European performance sedans of the 2000s? When Volvo introduced the S60 back in 2000, it was meant to be the brand's sporty alternative to the safe but boxy image they'd built in the 80s and 90s. The regular S60 was handsome, comfortable, and practical, but the S60R, launched in 2003, was a different animal altogether. Think of it as Volvo's answer to the BMW M3 and Audi S4. Except instead of making a loud, flashy performance car, Volvo did it the Volvo way. Subtle, understated, and just a little bit weird. The backstory here is kind of fascinating. At the time, Volvo had just been bought by Ford, which meant they had more resources than before, but also had to prove they could keep up with the Germans in the luxury segment. The R badge wasn't new to Volvo. Cars like the 850R in the 90s had already shown that these Swedes had a wild side, but the S60R was meant to bring that spirit into the new millennium with more refinement and a higher performance ceiling. It wasn't just a fast Volvo, it was Volvo's attempt to join the big leagues. And on paper, they absolutely came out swinging. Let's go through the numbers because this is where things get interesting. Under the hood, the S60R had a 2.5-liter turbocharged inline-5 engine. Yes, 5 cylinders, because why be normal? It pumped out 300 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. That power was sent through either a 6-speed manual or a 5-speed automatic, and it went to all 4 wheels via Volvo's Haldex-based all-wheel drive system. The result? A 0 to 60 time in about 5.4 seconds and a quarter mile in the low 14 seconds. Not bad at all for a car that looks like a commuter sedan. Now, if you're comparing this to an E46 BMW M3 of the time, which made 333 horsepower and screamed to 8,000 RPM, the Volvo didn't quite have the same razor-sharp edge. But compared to the Audi S4 with its V8 or the Mercedes C32 AMG, the S60R held its own remarkably well. And remember, the Germans leaned on tradition, while the Swedes were out here making a turbocharged 5-cylinder howl like an angry moose. I mean, just listen to this thing. Trim levels? Well, the S60R was kind of its own trim. It wasn't like today where you get 10 different versions of the same car with confusing names, but it did have some options. You could get it as a sedan or a wagon, which Volvo called the V70R, and both were absolute sleepers. If you wanted something that looked like you were on your way to pick up the kids from soccer practice, but could also hit 155 miles per hour on the Autobahn, the V70R was your car. And this wasn't just about the engine. The S60R had a ton of unique touches that set it apart. For starters, the Brembo brakes. 4-piston calipers on all 4 corners meant this thing could stop as well as it could go. It also had Volvo's trick 4C suspension system, which stood for continuously controlled chassis concept. Basically, the car could adjust its damping in real time based on your driving. You had 3 modes: Comfort, Sport, and Advanced. Comfort made it nice and soft for daily driving, Sport tightened things up, and Advanced was basically, let's pretend we're on the Nürburgring. Inside, the S60R didn't scream performance car. Instead, it whispered it politely in a Swedish accent. You got beautifully bolstered leather seats, some of the most comfortable sport seats of the era, along with unique blue gauges, subtle R badging, and an overall vibe that was more Scandinavian lounge than race car cockpit. It wasn't flashy, but it had character. Now, what about actually driving the thing? Well, reviews from the time said the S60R was quick, sure-footed, and surprisingly fun. The all-wheel drive system gave it tons of grip, especially in bad weather, making it a fantastic daily driver for people who lived in snowy climates. And that 5-cylinder engine gave it a soundtrack unlike anything else in its class. Growly, throaty, and distinct. It wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but it was definitely one of the most usable. Think of it like this. The M3 was a scalpel, the S4 was a sledgehammer, car, and the S60R was a really nice Swedish chef's knife. It could do almost everything, and it looked good doing it. Of course, no early 2000s European performance car is perfect. Reliability was, well, let's just say mixed. The engine itself was pretty stout, but the Haldex system, the 4C suspension, and even the manual transmissions could be problematic if not maintained properly. Repairs weren't cheap either because it's still a luxury European car. A well-kept S60R can be a joy, but a neglected one can absolutely ruin your wallet. When it came out, the S60R wasn't cheap. Prices started in the mid-40s thousands, which put it squarely against the Germans. But here's the thing. Today, you can find these cars for under $10,000 if you're patient. That's insane value for a 300 horsepower, all-wheel drive, manual European performance sedan. The trick, of course, is finding one that hasn't been destroyed by years of hard driving and deferred maintenance. And here's where things get even more interesting: the aftermarket scene. Now, the S60R wasn't as heavily supported as, say, the M3 or Evo, but enthusiasts who stuck with it found some real gems. That 2.5-liter 5-cylinder, it loves a tune. A simple ECU flash can push it well past 350 horsepower without breaking a sweat, and with a bigger turbo, you're knocking on 400-plus territory. Pair that with exhaust upgrades and a beefier intercooler, and suddenly this polite Swedish sedan turns into a full-on Autobahn menace. The suspension, while fancy for its time, was one of the weak spots, so a lot of owners ditch the factory 4C setup for coilovers, which not only makes it more reliable but sharpens the handling big time. And those Brembos, already solid, but throw on better pads and rotors and you've got track-ready stopping power. In other words, the S60R has this hidden potential. Stock, it was already quick and capable, but with the right mods, it becomes a Scandinavian sleeper that'll embarrass cars way newer and way pricier. Against its competition back in the day, the S60R was always kind of the underdog. The M3 had the prestige, the S4 had the V8, the AMG had the badge snobbery, but the Volvo had this understated charm that made it special. It didn't shout, it didn't flex, it just showed up, did the job, and quietly went home like a Swedish James Bond. And here's the thing, a lot of people don't realize about the S60R. It's rare. Volvo only built a limited number, and depending on who you ask, somewhere around 10 to 15,000 S60Rs made it to the US during its entire production run from 2003 to 2007. Compare that to the E46 M3, which sold well over 80,000 units worldwide, and you start to see just how uncommon these cars really are. That scarcity is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it means finding a clean S60R today is like spotting a unicorn at your local Cars and Coffee. On the other hand, because they flew under the radar for so long, a lot of them were daily driven into the ground, neglected, or modded poorly. So while the price tags might look tempting, like under 10 grand for 300 horsepower tempting, tracking down a well-maintained one can be a serious challenge. But for collectors, that's part of the appeal. The S60R is one of those cars that's only going to get more appreciated with time. It's quirky, it's rare, and it represents a weird moment in Volvo's history when they decided to take on the Germans at their own game. If you can find one in good condition, it's not just a fun driver, it's an investment in a cult classic. And that brings us to the legacy. The S60R didn't sell in huge numbers, and it didn't dethrone the Germans, but it carved out a niche following that's still alive today. Enthusiasts love it because it's different. It proved that Volvo could do performance seriously, and it paved the way for later models like the Polestar-tuned S60s and V60s that followed. Without the S60R, Volvo probably wouldn't have the performance credibility it enjoys today. So, is the S60R a forgotten hero? Absolutely. It's one of those cars that flew under the radar, but for the people who know, it's a cult classic. A safe, practical, understated sedan that just so happens to be a 300 horsepower beast. What do you think? Was the Volvo S60R a true rival to the M3 and S4? Or was it always destined to be the quirky outsider? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's see where you stand. And hey, if you enjoyed this dive into one of Volvo's wildest creations, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more underrated car spotlights, and ring the bell so you never miss a video. Because trust me, you're going to want to stick around for the next one.